Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another episode of Mortality Gaming. In this episode, I'll be discussing FPS spikes and lag issues in Gears of War 4 PC Edition. That way, you can enjoy this game in all of its high definition glory and how it's meant to be played. But just remember, if you enjoy this video and I help solve your problems, like the video down below and subscribe to my channel for more gaming content. The first step to get the game at the state you want it is to figure out exactly what your expectations are and can your computer handle it. I suggest starting at the 1080p setting and lock your FPS to 60 frames per second to start with. Set your settings to low and run the benchmark. If you look at the benchmark, you'll be ranked on 3 factors: CPU render, CPU game, and GPU. The results from this benchmark will give you a great idea on what your limitations are. Notice how the benchmark results are: my GPU is a constant 60 frames per second. Note that in the rest of my video, my FPS is always 60, but that's because my capture card locks it in. Notice the CPU although, the variable will never go below the GPU benchmark. You'll want to increase your setting from low and move one step at a time until ultra, until your CPU starts to go below your GPU, or your GPU starts to fluctuate as well. As you start increasing your settings though, you can also set your FPS to unlimited. That way you can see if your computer can handle a higher frames per second while maintaining a lag-free environment. Notice that on ultra settings, that my GPU stays a constant 60 frames per second. But you'll also notice that my CPU is all over the place. If the CPU at any point during the game is even not at its fully maxed out, but simply can't deliver the data fast enough, you'll start to have lag and FPS issues. Mind you, completely separate from your graphics card. You will also notice it most significantly when the CPU drops below what the graphic card is putting out. So if you're running a GTX 1080 Ti and still having FPS issues, take a look at your CPU in the benchmark. It just might be the culprit you're looking for. If your GPU is the one whose results are fluctuating, go to the settings, low through ultra graphic settings, and choose the option that kept your FPS at the desired level and never drop below it. You could choose a higher one if it's only minor dips, but you might experience FPS drops if you do so. It's also a good idea to go with the settings that are a little bit lower to boost your FPS above your goal, since certain areas of the game are a tad bit more FPS critical than the benchmark. Just a reminder, whichever benchmark is lower, whether it's GPU or CPU, expect that as your worst FPS drops. In my opinion, CPU bottlenecks will cause more FPS impacts than a GPU bottleneck. A CPU bottleneck to me seems to be major drops instantly, as a GPU is not as bad. When you benchmark the game on low and your CPU is an issue, chances are that you're going to need to overclock your CPU or get a more powerful CPU if you wish to increase its efficiency. Just remember, core count and clock speed, they are not the only determining factors to a CPU's gaming performance. If upgrading is not an option and you want to overclock, I highly encourage you research this topic a while before you even attempt it. You can kill your CPU if you do it wrong, and there's no turning back from there. You have completely killed your CPU. You can play the game based on your graphics card benchmark and still hit your FPS goal, but lag will be inevitable until you get a more powerful CPU. Now, if your GPU is the bottleneck that you are suffering from, and you can go above low settings, mind you though, that your gaming experience is completely your own opinion and whatever you prefer. I personally play on ultra, and I get FPS drops on occasion, but not enough to really bother me. Anyways, you got 2 options here. Again, you can overclock your GPU to get more power. This is easier in my opinion than the CPU, but the risks are the same. You can kill your graphics card, and there's no turning back. You'll need to purchase a new one. Or you can turn down some settings in your video menu to relieve some of the pressure on your graphics card. These options I will tell you have the biggest impact on the GPU, and by lowering them or turning them off completely should help your GPU increase its frames per second benchmark. The first one is dynamic resolution. It will lower the current resolution up to 50% based on your setting. This way, when the GPU is getting close to its max to keep your FPS at its peak, it will lower the resolution to keep the FPS flowing. I currently use it, and I do not notice it at all. Honestly, I'm too busy in the action of the game to pay any mind, but this could be a great option until you get a more powerful graphics card that can handle the game without it. Second is screen space reflections. This is the reflections you see in water and other reflectable surfaces. This has the biggest impact on your GPU by lowering it or turning it off completely. It can help you squeeze out those extra frames per second. Third is depth of field. This has to deal with your focal point of your camera and blurring out a bit of what is not in focus. It looks cool, but it's something you can get rid of completely if your GPU can't handle the game in all of its glory. Fourth is shadow quality. Its effect is basically its name. The higher setting, the smoother and better looking your shadows are. But if you need to squeeze out some extra frames per second, it might be worth knocking it down a level or two. The final one I will mention is ambient occlusion quality. This is almost as stressful to the GPU as shadow quality, but a little bit less. It also deals with shadows as well as mostly between objects blocking light from another and casting a shadow when appropriate. The rest of the options are about equal in their effect on the GPU and can be decreased at your own personal need for more frames per second getting squeezed out of your GPU. The last topic I would like to discuss are the system requirements for this game. Don't expect to have the minimum requirements or less thinking this video is going to help you. Hardware limitation is a true thing, but let's start with the RAM. You're going to want at least 8 GB of RAM, but to bring out the full potential of this game, you're going to want to be utilizing a full 16 GB of RAM. Hard drive speaking, you're going to want a hard drive that runs at a minimum of 7200 RPM. But to make sure your hard drive will never impact you, install this game on a solid state drive. You won't regret it. CPU specs, you'll want an i5-3470 bare minimum, but to bring out the full potential of this game, you're going to want to be utilizing a i7-4790. Personally, I'm getting ready to upgrade to a Ryzen 1800X. Although AMD does lag behind a tad in gaming performance against Intel, with the release of the Zen architecture, this Ryzen CPU can handle this game at max settings with no problem. Finally, the GPU, you'll want a GTX 750 Ti just to run this game at low graphics. But if you want to play this game in all its glory and beauty, you're going to want a 1080 Ti inside. These are all the options I have found so far from multiple sources, each with their own luck with different options. Combining some of these options might be your solution, but remember, every computer is different and composed of different components. Hopefully one of these options work for you and you don't need to upgrade any of your equipment at all. If it did, like the video below, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.